Okay, so when we are looking at an FRQ, we want to make sure that we read and understand what we're looking at. This is the FRQ from the banking multiple choice assignment that is in our Google Classroom on the date of April 7th. And so this is the FRQ from April 7th. I'm going to just write that up here so that we're sure that we remember that. Now, in order to read these questions or answer these questions, you have to read them appropriately. Number one says, James has been working to clean out his grandmother's house since she died. In it, he has found milk jugs filled with cash totaling $100,000. James deposits the cash into his checking account. Because it's a deposit, that tells us how we have to approach this question. This is similar to number 11 in the multiple choice that was assigned on Tuesday, and we talked out and gave the answer to this question on Tuesday. Number 2 in the FRQ says the Federal Reserve buys $100,000 worth of bonds. This is similar to number 12 from the multiple choice on Tuesday. And in order to answer these questions, you have to understand that the approach is a function of the fact that it's a deposit, which means that when you're looking to do change in money supply, that's going to be the excess reserve times the money multiplier. So this is the delta symbol is change. Change of the money supply equals excess reserves times the money multiplier. And then for number 12, change in the money supply equals the bond times the money multiplier. So long story short, when it's a deposit, you use the excess reserves. When it's a bond, you use the full value of the bond. So looking at number 1, then this number 1 is saying that it was a deposit. So what is the immediate impact on the money supply? The immediate impact on the money supply, that's letter A. The immediate impact is no change. Letter A for number 1A is no change. The reason there is no change on the immediate impact of the money supply is because the money already existed. It was a $100,000 deposit of cash. And it's when it says immediate, that means that nothing is happening. They just wanted to know what's going to be the effect on the money supply. If you're feeling fancy, you could say the money supply, you could say that the money supply, we have less currency now and more demand deposits. That's the essential bottom line of it. So 1B says, what is the immediate impact on demand deposits? Demand deposits go up by $100,000. Immediate means for this bank. And so since it's immediate, that means we're not making loans or anything like that. So 1B means that demand deposits are going to go up $100,000. The reason is because it's a deposit. A demand deposit is a checking account. And so that's a vocabulary thing that you have to remember. 1C says, if the bank keeps 20% of the money on reserve, how much can the bank initially loan out? Initially loan out. Okay, so the bank just got a $100,000 deposit, and so if 20% is the reserve requirement, that means that 20,000 of that 100,000 is what we call the required reserve. The bank cannot lend that out. That has to stay on site. But what that does tell us is that the other remainder of the money is what we get to call excess reserves. If 20,000 of the 100,000 is required, that means the remainder is $80,000. So your answer to 1C, how much can this bank initially loan out? This bank can initially loan $80,000. This is what we call the loanable funds. And that we're actually going to graph loanable funds today. That's what we're going to do when we're done with the FRQ. 1D then says, if the reserve requirement is 20%, what is the maximum amount of the money supply can expand based on the initial $100,000 deposit? Whenever it says maximum that the money supply can expand, that means they want the change in the money supply. You know, we just went through the rigmarole of saying that the change in the money supply is going to equal the excess reserve times the money multiplier when it's a deposit. This was a deposit. So that means for this problem, the change in the money supply equals the excess reserve times the money multiplier. Now we have to calculate these things. The excess reserve is $80,000. We just calculated that. But what's the money multiplier? The money multiplier is 1 divided by that ratio. The ratio in this problem is 20%. So that means 1 divided by 20%. That means 1 divided by 0.2. So how many times does 0.2 go into a dollar? How many times does 20 cents go into a dollar? The answer is 5 times. So $80,000 times the money multiplier of 5, The answer for 1D then, the maximum that this money supply can expand is $400,000. 5 times 8 is 40. Add the zeros back on. Boom. There you go. $400,000. That's your answer to 1D. 1E says what might cause the money supply to expand less than the amount that we calculated. So this is what we call the maximum change. It could change less if the bank doesn't lend all the money. It could change less if I took out $10,000 of the loan. What if I took $50 of it and stuck it in my wall for the apocalypse? If I did that, that means that the full value of the money is not getting lent out, and that means we're not going to get to the maximum $400,000. In order to get to that maximum $400,000, all the money always has to be lent. If grandma puts the money in a cookie jar, if the Gallagher family puts the money in their squirrel fund, then that means that the money is not going to get lent, and that means it won't maximize at the $400,000. And so your answer to this 1E question, this is going to come up on the AP exam, is if the bank doesn't lend all the money, it's not going to maximize. Or if people store the cash, then the money is not going to maximize. That's how you answer that question. Okay, that was 1. Let's do number 2. Now, number 2 says the Federal Reserve buys $100,000 worth of bonds. And so the first question, what is the immediate impact of the money supply? The money supply is going to immediately go up by $100,000. Up by $100,000. Because when the Fed buys bonds, they're kind of printing the money. They're magically poof creating the money out of thin air. And so oftentimes what the Fed will do is they will print the money, and then they will go to the bank and give them the $100,000, and then they'll take the bond. So in this case, the immediate impact on the money supply is up $100,000. So what is the immediate impact on demand deposits? That was 1A or 2A, by the way. 2B, what is the immediate impact on demand deposits? No change. The answer, the reason why it's no change is because this is not a person depositing the money into a checking account. This is the Fed creating money. So now the bank just has this cash sitting on site. When this happens, this is going to become what we call loanable funds. And so there you have it. All right. So 2C then says, if the bank keeps 20% of the money in reserve, how much can this bank initially lend out? Well, guess what, guys? This is the exact same question that we did in the previous question. 20% on site, it means that 20,000 is going to stay on site. And then that means that the excess reserve for this problem is going to be 80,000 again. It's the exact same math. That's the first part of that answer. That was letter C. Letter D, if the reserve requirement is 20%, what is the maximum amount that the money supply can expand? This is a bond purchase. And so that means that the change in the money supply for this one is going to equal the value of the bond times the money multiplier. Now, in this case, then, that means that this equals $500,000 because the bond is $100,000. And we already did the math on the reserve ratio. Remember, the money multiplier, that's 1 divided by the 20% equals 1 divided by 0.2. How many times is 20 cents going to dollar? That's 5 times. So 5 times that bond of 100,000 is 500,000. And then letter E says, what might cause the money supply to expand less than the amount you calculated in D? This, ladies and gentlemen, is the exact same answer. If the bank doesn't lend all the money, then it's not going to reach the full potential 500,000. Or if grandma puts the money in a cookie jar, then and doesn't spend it, then that means that you're also not going to reach the full maximum of the 500,000. In order to reach the full maximum of the 500,000, everybody has to spend all the money that they get, and the banks have to lend all the money. That's got to happen over and over and over until it's maximized. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is the answer to our FRQ from yesterday.